paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers.
I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. Today, my guest is Lynn Crook. She just wrote a wonderful book. It's called False Memories, The Deception That Silenced Millions. How are you doing today, Lynn?
I'm doing well, Nick. How are you?
Not too bad. Your book is fantastic. You get into the societal problems of false memories, but then you get into your own case with false memories.
Yes.
And suing your family. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, well, I was molested as a child, and in order to keep myself safe, I taught myself, my father helped me, taught me how to forget it, how to repress it. So and I was just a kid, and I was learning to read and to write. And he said, if you remember something, just say, forget it. And what I did now as an adult, I know I formed a neural pathway so that whenever I thought of it, I could forget it. And it kept me safe. It kept me safe for years and years and years. And then it wasn't until 45 that my memory finally became my teacher. So I decided to sue my parents. It seemed like the right thing to do. And as soon as I sued them, then the False Memory Syndrome Foundation started. And I looked at the first article from the AP, and I thought it was an interview with Elizabeth Loftus, and I thought, that doesn't apply to my case. That doesn't either. So the case went to court. It went to a month-long trial, and the judge declared in my favor. My case was corroborated.
And you had family members corroborating your case.
I had family members corroborating it too. And my father said that it wasn't child sex abuse if a father made his daughter touch his penis. Legally it is, but not to him.
So I'm very sorry to hear about your childhood problems, but you came back with this book and you really gave, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation has been a house of cards that's been blown down, but I think you've taken the house of cards that has been blown down and stamped on it, and never for it to be resurrected again.
I like to think I took it apart one by one, and now it's all flat. And the problem that I have is that false memories is still in psych textbooks, and the popular press still believes it. So our job is not done.
Well, they were very potent. Could you tell us about the genesis of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation?
It started when Jennifer Fried accused her father, and her parents decided that there was a false accusation. And so Pamela wrote a book, a magazine article gaslighting her daughter Jennifer. She was stupid, crazy, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't go anyplace. And so Elizabeth Loftus got busy, and she came up with various reasons why people would accuse their parents, which were like they were out for revenge, or they just did it, or she finally came up with something that the media liked. It was a therapist implanted false memories in her. And the Washington Post liked it, and that's how they invented false memories as a defense.
So Pamela Fried and Peter Fried, they were husband and wife, but they were also brother and sister.
Stepbrother and sister.
Stepbrother and sister. And could you tell us how they were the nucleus of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, how they got the ball rolling?
Um, Pamela, after her article, she started asking around, and she found some friends who she got. I'm not sure exactly about this part. I just know what I observed, and she got some friends who supported her, and they all got together, about 12 of them, and they decided to start this organization to support parents who were accused of incest by their children, because Pamela was determined to prove to the world that her husband was innocent, even though her daughter had been molested for years.
And her daughter's statements were more or less corroborated by their other daughter and also by Peter Fried's brother.
Yes, Peter Fried's brother went public. Jennifer's sister did not, but she supports her.
So Peter Fried told the Philadelphia Magazine that the reason why he didn't molest his daughter. Now, here's a guy with a PhD in mathematics.
Yes.
Why he didn't molest his daughters because the dog didn't bark.
Yes, that's always a clue.
So basically, we have a stepbrother and stepsister who have married each other. The father has molested one of the daughters, and the father has a PhD in mathematics, and he tells the Philadelphia Magazine that he didn't molest his daughter because the dog didn't bark. So that's the nucleus of a very successful campaign that would take over print media and other types of media, and also really get its claws into academia.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but why you think that happened, but I think it happened because they had a story that we wanted to believe, that that no adult was molested by their parents, and that's a nice story.
It's a very nice story. Unfortunately, it's not true. If it was true, there wouldn't be so many people incarcerated in prisons. If it was, there wouldn't be so many people in psychiatric hospitals. And if it was true, there wouldn't be so many people receiving disability. But
yes, and there wouldn't be the prevalence rates that we have, because if it is 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 11 boys, that means that 48 million adults in the US were molested as children. It's amazing. Pam Fried never took that into consideration. They didn't mention prevalence rates.
Well, they didn't mention anything that was negative towards their views. So we have the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and a psychologist named Martin Orne signs on, who just happened to take part in CI mind control experiments.
True.
So we have a wonderful nucleus. We have Pamela Fried, and actually Pamela Fried's daughter became a psychologist, a PhD. She got a PhD, and she was working at Portland. And could you tell us how Pamela Fried tried to get her own daughter fired after her daughter, and her daughter kept those allegations within the family. She didn't say anything outside the family.
I think what you're talking about is the article that Pamela wrote.
Yes.
In a prestigious journal. Well, not prestigious, it was in a journal.
Yeah.
And she sent it to all the professors that her daughter worked with. So they all knew that she had been that she had accused her father. But Jennifer kept her job.
So basically, we have two pretty sick individuals at the heart of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And then we've got someone who has done CI mind control experimentation in Martin Orne. And then they collected Ralph Underwager and Halida Wakefield.
Yes.
Ralph was, he didn't stay on the False Memory Syndrome Foundation board for very long because he gave an interview to a Dutch pedophile magazine saying that pedophilia was God's will. So once that he got outed on that, he actually resigned. I mean, I'm surprised that they didn't keep him on, given the pathology that's already starting to grow. It's kind of like a virus now. It's starting to accumulate. And they managed to collect a lot of wealthy people whose children had accused them of molestation, and they managed to raise millions of dollars.
Right, they raised millions and millions. They raised a total of $7.7 million just in donations from members. And they were all at least middle class. So, and they took that money and they used it to promote themselves as falsely accused. Yeah.
And the thing is, with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, they didn't even provide a diagnostic criteria for the false memory syndrome.
They didn't. No, they didn't. David Kaloff tried to get one, and she said, "Okay, I'll come back the second part of the interview, and I'll give you the criteria." And she came back, and it was that criteria, like, did the dog bark or not? It was that sort of thing. It wasn't very well founded, and that diagnostic criteria never appeared anyplace else. The media never asked for it, and they didn't provide it to anyone. Yeah.
Well, Pamela Fried et al. Received a lot of money. They pumped $2.3 million into promotion between 1992 and 1995.
Yeah, she didn't get paid the first year, but after that, she earned, at least the first year after that, she earned $60,000. She was taking a pay, and she earned it. She was working her butt off.
Well, they worked very, very hard, and they were able to mobilize these parents who said that they were falsely accused of abuse by their children. I mean, they were able to mobilize them everywhere. And if there was an article written about a repressed memory being taken seriously, those parents would mobilize and inundate the paper, the magazine, with all kinds of nasty threats, etc.
They did. They had that power. And when you can get 100 letters sent by 100 different people to a reporter, that reporter is going to pay attention. That reporter doesn't know that this is part of an organized response to that article. The false memory people were really, really good with the media.
Well, their hate crimes didn't appear as hate crimes.
No.
And in 1995, the American Psychological Association actually gave the False Memory Syndrome Foundation its blessing and provide continuing education classes. And granted, the people at the False Memory Syndrome Foundation didn't even have a criteria for the false memory syndrome.
That's right, they did. So false memory people could go out and do a presentation, and APM members could attend and get some of the credits that they were required to get every year. That was amazing that they did that. Just that was an amazing accomplishment by the false memory people.
And at their second conference, I believe it was 1995, they were able to co-sponsor with Johns Hopkins University. I mean, that's how lofty they moved in very high circles.
They did. They had a board member on Johns Hopkins, and he got them that billing. And they also had someone at Johns Hopkins who would take the letters that were written from people like me saying, "What's the deal? You guys are promoting this." They send all those letters to the false memory people. So if you complained about that, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation knew your name.
And in your book, you say that false memory claims make up 85% of sexual assault stories. Could you talk a little bit about that?
That was when, that was about 1994, 1995, before the media had covered child sex abuse as an actual event, as a crime. But with all this promotion from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, they were slanting everything towards false memories. So everything was, yeah, we're not too sure it's true. could, and then you pull someone in like Loftus who would say, oh, could be a false memory. So they were slanting every single article that they did. In retrospect, I am not so upset with the False Memory Syndrome Foundation as I am with the media, because the media never, ever questioned anything they said. And I know that the media is not going to question anyone with a PhD, and they all have PhDs, but the media never once said, that story you gave us about the older brother who convinced his brother he was lost that time they both went to the mall.
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on Elizabeth Loftus a little later.
Oh, okay. Anyway, that doesn't apply to what a therapist might say. So, okay, go ahead.
Before then?
Pardon?
Well, we can lay down a foundation before we get to Elizabeth Loftus, because she deserves her own time in this interview. A special demarcated time for Elizabeth Loftus in this interview. So the media really got on board, and Richard Offshee, who was one of the board members of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, the New York Times gave a glowing review to his book, Making Monsters, False Memories, Psychotherapy, and Hysteria. And it actually won the Pulitzer Prize.
I don't know that. No, I don't think it did.
It did. It said that he had won the Pulitzer Prize.
It was for something else.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Could you talk to a little bit about Richard Offshee?
Richard Offshee was one of the members who was very loud, very vociferous, very insistent. That's how he talked at conferences. That's how he talked to the media. And it worked for a while. It did. But eventually he kind of got kicked out because he and Howard Leaf had a big fight. And the false memory people sided with Leaf. So Offshee was gone. But he was probably the most vociferous member that they had. He was an expert in my case. And he testified, but I was watching Offshee and everyone else was watching the judge's face. The judge's face did not approve of him because he was so vociferous and insistent. That's just the way he was.
And the New York Times seemed to have jumped on board with this. There was a New York Times book review, Beware of the Incest Survivor Machine. And the book review said that there was a clandestine plot. These false memories were a clandestine plot by therapists and authors of self-help books to make money. That was the crux of that book review.
That's such a fascinating story. And it worked.
It did. And could you talk to us about Frontline's Divided Memories? That is quite a story.
Frontline's Divided Memories, that was done by Ofer Bickel. And she did the first one. It was, can't remember the name, Divided Memories. And everyone watched it. It got great reviews. And so I did some fact checking. It was fairly simple. And so I wrote a letter to Frontline saying, this is not supported by facts. And they were not supportive to my, I thought that this is Frontline. They should want to know the truth, but they weren't supportive. They didn't respond in a supportive fashion. So I thought, okay, what the heck? And then Ofer did another program, something about Satan. And I did the same thing. I did some research. I did some research and I responded, but they said, no, you're wrong. They weren't interested in facts. And I don't know what all that was about. Ofer Bickel, I don't know what that was about. I know that she was married to Theodore Bickel when she was 15. They had a baby and they divorced after a year. That's the only thing I know about her.
And Divided Memories seem to extol the virtues of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
Somehow they were able to find Ofer. They were able to find a producer for Frontline who was willing to do that. And I think that those stories that she did for them gained a lot of supporters for the false memory people. But then I eventually did a story on recanters. I researched the 2 recanters that were on Search for Satan, and both of them said that no false memories were implanted. Oh, yeah, both of them said, one under oath, one under deposition, that no false memories were implanted. Somebody else could have done that research years earlier and found that out.
And as long as we're into that, could you talk to us about Mary Shanley?
Okay, Mary Shanley. She was the one, after she did Divided Memory, she's the one who was the lead witness in the lawsuit against, criminal lawsuit against Judith Peterson and others in Houston. And
they had come out and said that some of their patients had suffered from repressed memory. So that was, or DID, that was the crux of the criminal lawsuit.
Yeah, and so they focused, I think they were just looking for a criminal case so they could put therapists in prison, and that would teach those therapists a lesson. But it didn't work out that way, because Mary Shanley was on the stand, and Judith Peterson hired the best attorney. It was just like Perry Mason. I think he questioned her for about a week, maybe 2 weeks. And finally he gets her down, pinpoints her like Perry Mason does. And the only thing she can say is, okay, you're right. No false memories were implanted. Okay, so we got her to that point. And it took a very skilled attorney to do that. But that I got to see that happen. That was amazing.
So that case went through interrogatories and depositions, and it was all predicated on lies. And the prosecution wanted to take out like 5 therapists, I believe.
Yeah, they wanted to put them in jail for life.
5, because they had diagnosed patients with dissociative identity disorder.
Yes.
And the viciousness of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation and its acolytes there's just so many examples of it in your book that it's difficult to pull which ones out. But there was a book that was written, and it was a self-help book for survivors called The Courage to Heal. And supporters of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation tried to get it branded as pornography and completely taken off the shelves. I mean, totally mind-boggling. I mean, a book that would help survivors. This organization was so perfidious that they didn't even want a book on the bookshelves that would help survivors.
Right. That was one of the humorous things that I came across when they tried to have Courage to Heal condemned as pornography. I thought that was really funny. It didn't work.
But it just shows the length and perfidiousness of that organization.
Yeah, one thing I noticed, and I still don't quite understand it, is the people in that organization are vicious.
Yes.
I think either in that group it's okay to be vicious again towards other people, to personally attack people, or I still don't understand why they thought they could be that vicious, why they could do all the name calling, why Pam Fried could call her daughter all those names. That was awful what they did, but they thought it was okay. It's odd.
Actually, I wanted to interview Pamela Fried, and I called her up, and I just wanted to talk about talking, and told her what kind of gave her a general overview, the questions that I was going to answer. And she was sweet as Tupelo honey to me. She thought, well, here's a journalist that I can sway. And then in the interim, she Googled Nick Bryant.
Uh-oh.
And then when I called the next week, I found that she wasn't as sweet as Tupelo honey. And actually, our conversation, I think, lasted 2 or 3 minutes at the most. So apparently, she Googled me and didn't like me. I'm on the internet. I don't know. Most people like me on the internet. I mean, there's some people that don't. And you go ahead.
That was one of the amazing things that they all accomplished, to create accepting people within the media who didn't confront them, who didn't say, wait, that doesn't make sense. No, the reporters just sat there and they just took notes, and that's all they did. That's the kind of reporter that they were looking for, and that reporter wasn't you.
I can remember when I came across the Franklin story in 2002, and then I started pitching it to editors, and then ultimately the agent that I had, we were pitching it to publishers. And now the editors went through cognitive dissonance, and I've said it on this podcast before. They were thinking this story that Nick Bryant is bringing us is really a horrible story. We need to help Nick Bryant out, or I can just write Nick Bryant off as crazy, and then I can go home tonight and have a nice dinner with my family, and we can watch television. And so that was some major cognitive dissonance. And when I met with publishers, they were primarily concerned about libel. They didn't think I was crazy. They just were concerned about libel. So it took me a very long time to get the Franklin scandal published. In your book, you bring in a lot of really good studies. You brought in a study by Constance Dallenberg that found recovered memories of child abuse are just as valid as non-recovered memories.
Yes. Interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
That recovered memories can be validated, like mine, because I had corroboration. If I found when I was working as a therapist that if you keep asking questions and pushing a little bit, every single time I could come across corroboration for someone who had been molested as a child. It was always there. Always.
Your book, you talk about 20 studies have corroborated recovered memories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of academic data out there that recovered memories aren't the thing of unicorns, even though the False Memory Syndrome Foundation had tremendous reach when it came to subverting these types of issues. And you also have a study that says less than or 1% of child molestation accusations are false.
Right.
So that's rare. And I've talked about it on this podcast before. There was a judge named Patrick Schills who was at one point an attorney he represented various Catholic dioceses in 500 cases. And after he became a judge, and this was actually in the New York Times. I mean, the New York Times printed it, so it's got to be true.
Yes.
He said that he felt like less than 10 of the people that had come forward out of those 500 cases weren't telling the truth. So he concluded that 2% of those 500 cases were false. So the vast majority of who wants to come forward with these type of allegations? You're going to take a beating. You're going to take a beating by attorneys. You could take a beating by your family. I mean, there's a lot of times there just isn't an upside to coming forward about these types of allegations.
Right, because the first thing you're going to hear is your memories are false. Now, are you going to continue or not? Because you know they're not false. And if you can get corroboration, you can continue. But you have to be tough to continue, because they will try to stop you.
And then you also cited 2 CDC studies that found that children that experience a lot of adverse childhood experiences or ACEs have greater amnesia than children that don't. That there's a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and amnesia. So if I had a extremely horrific childhood, I would definitely, and where there was a lot of adverse child events, that I would definitely block that out. I mean, that study makes perfect sense to me.
And I would just like to say that when you say, someone may hear that and say, oh, we can't block out stuff like that, but children can. Their brains aren't mature until they're 25. Children can find it quite easy to forget things. Children forget things anyway. Notice when my grandchildren were growing up, when they were even up until 5, they were forgetting lots of things. It was easy to forget. So memory repression to me isn't about academics dueling it out. It's about children trying to protect themselves, trying to save themselves so they don't have to think about the awful stuff.
And then you also had a government survey that found that 42% of mothers tolerate abuse.
40, what was that?
42% of mothers tolerate abuse.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a very early date. That was very early data. It came out right at the first survey that they took, and we never heard that again. Apparently that wasn't on their surveys after that. I don't know. But that's huge.
I've experienced that in my own life. My stepfather could be hugely violent. And he was punching me out in the living room. I was 12 years old. And my mother came into the living room and said, don't hit him with a closed fist. And I said to myself, I am not safe in this house. And I ran away. I was 12 years old, and that was the first time I ran away.
Good for you.
Well, now that I've written about the Franklin scandal, and I'm edified about how networks work and how predators work, I'm really glad I didn't get that far that time, because at 12 years old, I was ripe to be a victim.
Yeah. You would have been picked up, yeah.
When I was running away when I was 14 or 15, I was bigger and cynical. So I wasn't going to be sucked into something like that. But at 12, I would have been highly susceptible to it. And I talked to my mom about that many years later, and she just categorically denied it and said that her husband wouldn't do anything like that.
Yeah, that's what we often say. Oh, he would never do anything like that. Oh, Bill Cosby would never do anything like that. They would. I found 12. I think there's about 12 different things that we say, so we don't have to believe that people we know are child molesters. Yep.
I was never molested sexually, but as I said, my stepfather could be very violent. So now let's get into Elizabeth Loftus. You spend a lot of the book talking about Elizabeth Loftus, and she's deserving of a conversation between you and me. Tell us about the mall study.
The mall study, she was the one who thought up the story of therapists implant memories. So she needed some proof that therapists can implant memories. So she asked her students at the University of Washington, her 201 psychology class, to implant a memory of getting lost in a mall. So they all went home and they all convinced a younger relative that the younger relative got lost in a mall, which had nothing to do with therapy. But she presented that story.
Or sexual abuse.
Or sexual abuse. Yeah, good point. But she presented that to the media as if it were convincing evidence that therapists could implant false memories in their clients. And then she went on to do a formal study. And in this formal study, I first found out about it in my deposition, my attorney's deposition, the deposition of Loftus, when Loftus said the first 6 subjects were dropped from the mall. And I thought, that's odd, because I have a master's degree in psychology, and I knew there was something wrong with that. So I kept following up. And what I found was that that actually no false memories were implanted in the mall study. But they were so desperate for research proving their story that Loftus had to inflate her results to 5 or 6.
So that basically was, she lassoed a student of hers into doing this, and he was talking about his brother and how his brother got lost in the mall. His mother didn't remember it, but his brother seemed to remember it, and that was the nucleus. But the problem with Loftus is she was citing the mall study before the Human Subjects Review Committee at the University of Washington even sanctioned it. You talk about that in your book.
She was citing the experiment. She wasn't citing the mall study exactly, but people get confused about that, and I'm sure that was not by accident. And she finally got the mall study approved in August, just a few days before she went to the APA conference, where she stood there and told the story about the brothers and how this was evidence that, possibly evidence that therapists could implant false memories.
And what's interesting about Loftus, we've got her showing up at the Nassar trial at Michigan State, the doctor who molested all those Olympians. We've got her showing up at the Harvey Weinstein trial as a witness. We've got her showing up at the Ghislaine Maxwell trial as a witness. She makes pretty good money flying around the world, basically deconstructing the memories of people that have been abused. And this is, I found this in your book and it was pretty interesting. As the listeners might know, there was a woman named Blaisley Ford who came out and said that she'd been molested by Brett Kavanaugh, who was going to be a Supreme Court justice. And so it was basically like with Thomas, it was he said, she said with Anita Hill, and Blaisley Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, it was a he said, she said. And Loftus said, now this is a woman that makes a lot of money for,
$600 an hour, okay.
Makes $600 an hour. Now she said there was a book called Wasted Tales of Gen X Drunk, and of a Gen X drunk, and it was written by Mark Judge. And Loftus said that Blaisley Ford could have read that book, and because one of the characters is Brett O'Kavanaugh, who's a little on the unsavory side, and that could have implanted something in her where she extrapolated it out to Brett Kavanaugh. Now, talk about repressed memories and implanting memories. I mean, she's making a pretty strong case, but she goes to bat. And there were other women that did come out and say that Brett Kavanaugh had molested them. So Blaisley Ford wasn't the only one. But wherever there's some malignancy going on, Loftus is there to pick up the flag. It's quite amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah, that was one of the more amusing parts of the book is there were probably 10 different reporters who called Loftus for her quote, for her wisdom on the Kavanaugh Blaisley Ford situation. And she gave each of them a totally different scenario. Like, oh, it really happened, but she was too ashamed, yada, yada, yada. And I thought that was funny. I thought that was very creative of Loftus, that she came up with a special thing for everyone. I also suspected that, I don't know if this is true, I also suspected that a Kavanaugh supporter sent a press release out to all these reporters and suggested they call Loftus, and Loftus was totally prepared when these reporters called. A different story for everyone. Yep.
And for the listeners that really don't quite pick up how the False Memory Syndrome Foundation steamrolled the media, Loftus wrote a book called The Myth of the Repressed Memory. And the Boston Globe compared Loftus to a modern day Arthur Schindler. Now, Arthur Schindler helped a number of Jews survive in World War II. I don't really know who Loftus has helped to survive. She's aided and abetted parents whose children have accused them of molestation, but I don't really see how you could draw an analogy between Elizabeth Loftus and Arthur Schindler.
No, but I'm sure Loftus appreciated that. I think it was a bit of a stretch to compare Loftus to her, but she has compared herself and to Schindler. And when questions about that, she said no, she never did. But that's in the book. I quote her saying that. So she has to defend herself for going out to defend the bad guys. So how do you defend someone like a prisoner, a guy who was in charge of prisoners who raped someone? She's defending, what I'm trying to say, she's defending some very bad people. And she says that she does it to give them a fair trial, which means that when they're found guilty, they shouldn't be able to ask for a new trial because they got a fair trial because they hired Loftus. Just logic.
And needless to say, Elizabeth Loftus was on the board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And the False Memory Syndrome Foundation died in 2019.
Yes, it did. And lots of people wondered why, and there's probably it's probably several reasons, but Pam Fried was getting on in age. She was in her early 80s. And I think it was time for her just to leave.
And apparently there wasn't someone that she could pass the torch to.
Apparently not. She was still holding up her fist and saying that's wrong. She still complained about articles, like she complained about Katie Heaney's article. She complained about Josh Kendall's article, both supportive of repressed memory. So she's still out there doing stuff. I haven't heard from her in a while. In fact, I haven't heard from Loftus in a few months. Usually she gets a media interview before now. It's been, I think, about 4 or 5 months.
So with Loftus's, I want to go back to the mall study. The student that helped Loftus was, I believe his name was Joshua Cohn.
Jim Cohn.
Jim Cohn. And he was the one that helped Loftus, and he was the one that convinced his little brother, ostensibly convinced his little brother that he'd gotten lost in the mall. And the New York Times wrote an article extolling the virtues. It was called Childhood Trauma, Memory or Invention. So again, the New York Times scores an assist for the bad guys.
That was Goldman's article?
Yeah.
Yeah. Goldman was a supporter of Loftus. And I even emailed the fact checker at the New York Times and said, look, here are the facts in the mall study, and this is what Goldman said. What you said wasn't true. Have him make a correction. And so she came back to me and she said, well, she talked to Goldman. Goldman talked to Loftus, and Loftus said the mall study was accurate, so his story is accurate, period, exclamation mark. So that was the end of it.
So in closing, is there anything that you'd like to say about the False Memory Syndrome Foundation or Elizabeth Loftus or any of its members or a number of the studies that you cite in your book, which is a really good book? I read it in a couple of days.
Thank you. It took me, I worked for at least 12 years on that during research, and I finally put the story all together, and I got a standing ovation at a conference, and that's what caused me to write this book. But I think that the false memory people have caused a lot of damage, a lot of harm, a lot of pain for the last 30 years. And I wish we're just starting to wake up, maybe not the popular press, but we're just starting to wake up to the fact that child sex abuse really does happen. And yes, there are 40 million adults in the US who were molested as children. That's fact. If you want to believe differently, fine, but that's the truth.
Well, you're using numbers that were gleaned by the CDC, I believe.
Yes.
And a lot of experts in the field think that that's an underestimate of the actual numbers, but still, it's a substantial. If those people got together, they would be the third most powerful political party in the United States.
There is tremendous political power in 48 million. Yes.
What amazes me is with Epstein. Epstein was covered up in broad daylight in America. And in the United States, we have millions of people that have experienced sexual abuse, but yet the media was able to cover it up in broad daylight. And only one person got indicted when we know who the procurers are. We know who a number of the perps are. That was very disheartening to me. Very disheartening.
Because so many got away free, you mean?
I mean, all of them should have been arrested. I mean, all of those perpetrators, all of those, and the New York Times even named 6 procurers. One of them was Maxwell, and there were 5 others. But they didn't get indicted. If the Department of Justice wasn't covering this up, it would go to the procurers and say, well, first of all, you could hit the procurers up with multiple counts of child trafficking, which carry a 15 to life sentence. And you could rack it up to 1,000 years, 2,000. I mean, they were in business for a very long time. You could find lots of victims. And then these procurers would be looking at the rest of their life in prison, and then they would roll over on the perps. I mean, that's how the American Mafia was taken apart. That's how the Department of Justice took the American Mafia apart. And this, what we are talking about, a child trafficking network, I think that's more heinous than the things that the Mafia was doing. Hopefully the Mafia wasn't doing trafficking children, but if it was equally heinous. But trafficking children is the most heinous crime there is. And for our media to allow all those procurers and perpetrators just to walk and go on with their life. I mean, the government did. And then the media took its cue from the government. I just find that so mind-boggling to me.
And I take a different approach. I think, look how much we've accomplished with Epstein. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago. We are making progress, but it's very slow. It's just very slow because we have a hard time dealing with sex and children and trafficking. But we are moving forward, I think. I think maybe my grandchildren will see a different world. I hope so. We're further along than we were when I was a child. I just want to say that.
We are moving forward, but I think we're moving forward with the velocity of a glacier. I mean, that's
that fast, huh? Yeah, it's going very slow. It's very political. The Faulty Memory Syndrome Foundation was very political. It's run like a political party. It's very political, but every once in a while you get a good guy in the government who's willing to hold someone accountable or a couple of people accountable. And we can make changes.
Well, that's what I've been trying to do for 21 years, and I'm still optimistic about it, although sometimes.
Yeah, good.
Although sometimes it does get a little disheartening. And I just want to thank you for the interview, and I want to thank you for writing a great book.
Thank you.
And I read it with rapt attention, like I said, in a couple of days. And I want you to have a great day.
Thank you. You too, Nick.
Okay, take care.
Let's go take care of the world. Save children.